Suddenly they were aware of voices, and looking out warily from the trees they saw a red light below. A company of orcs was encamped in the midst of the road, huddled about a large wood fire. Guth on Glamhoth, Tuor muttered. Now the sword shall come from under the cloak. I will risk death for mastery of that fire, and even the meat of orcs would be a prize. Nay, said Vodonwe, on this quest only the cloak will serve. You must forego the fire, or else forego Turgon. This band is not alone in the wild. Cannot your mortal sight see the far flame of other posts to the north and to the south? A tumult will bring a host upon us. Hearken to me, Tuor. It is against the law of the hidden kingdom that any should approach the gates with foes at their heels. And that law I will not break, neither for Umo's bidding, nor for death. Rouse the orcs, and I leave you. Then let them be, said Tuor. But may I live yet to see the day when I need not seek a side from a handful of orcs like a cow dog. Come then, said Voronwe, debate no more, for they will scent us. Follow me. He gripped then away through the trees southward down the wind until they were midway between the orc fire and the next upon the road. There he stood still a long while listening. I hear none moving on the road, he said, but we know not what may be lurking in the shadows. He peered forward into the gloom and shuddered. The air is evil, he muttered. Alas, yonder lies the land of our quest and hope of life, but death walks between. Death is all about us, said Tuor, but I have strength left only for the shortest road. Here I must cross, or perish. I will trust to the mantle of Umo, and you also it shall cover. Now I will lead. So saying, he stole to the border of the road. Then clasping Voronwe close, he cast about them both the folds of the grey cloak of the Lord of Waters, and stepped forth. All was still. The cold wind sighed as it swept down the ancient road. Then suddenly it too fell silent. In the pause Tuor felt a change in the air, and if the breath from the land of Morgoth had failed a while, and faint as a memory of the sea came a breeze from the west, as a grey mist on the wind they passed over the stony street and entered a thicket on its eastern brink. All at once from near at hand there came a wild cry, and many others along the borders of the road answered it. A harsh horn blared, and there was the sound of running feet, but Tuor held on. He had learned enough of the tongue of the orcs in his captivity to know the meaning of those cries. The watchers had scented them and heard them, but they were not seen. The hunt was out. Desperately he stumbled and crept forward with Voronwe at his side, up a long slope deep in whim and whortleberry, among knots of rowan and low birch. At the top of the ridge they halted, listening to the shouts behind and the crashing of the orcs in the undergrowth below. Beside them was a boulder that reared its head out of a tangle of heath and brambles, and beneath it was such a lair as a hunted beast might seek and hope there to escape pursuit, at least with its back to stone to sell its life dearly. Down into the dark shadow Tuor drew Voronwe, and side by side under the grey cloak they lay and panted like tired foxes. No word they spoke, all their heed was in their ears. The cries of the hunters grew fainter, for the orcs thrust never deep into the wild lands at either hand, but swept rather down and up the road. They recked little of stray fugitives, but spies they feared, and the scouts of armed foes, for Morgoth had set a guard on the highway, not to ensnare Tuor and Voronwe, of whom as yet he knew nothing, nor any coming from the west, but to watch for the black sword, lest he should escape and pursue the captives of Nargothrond. bringing help, it might be, out of Doriath. The night passed, and the brooding silence lay again upon the empty lands. Weary and spent, Tuor slept beneath Ulmo's cloak, but Voronwë crept forth and stood like a stone, silent, unmoving, piercing the shadows with his elvish eyes. At the break of day he woke Tuor, and he creeping out saw that the weather had indeed for a time relented, and the black clouds were rolled aside. There was a red dawn, and he could see far before him the tops of strange mountains glinting against the eastern fire. Then Voronwë said in a low voice, "Alai erid en Ekoriath, erid en Barnin," for he knew that he looked on the encircling mountains and the walls of the realm of Turgon. Below them, eastward, in a deep and shadowy vale lay Sirion the Fair, renowned in song, and beyond, wrapped in mist, a great land climbed from the river to the broken hills at the mountain's feet. "Yonder lies Dimbar," said Voronwë. "Would we were there, for there our foes seldom dare to walk, or so it was while the power of Ulmo was strong in Sirion. But all may now be changed, save the peril of the river. It is already deep and swift, and even for the Eldar dangerous to cross. But I have led you well, for there gleams the ford of Brithiach, yet a little southward, where the east road that of old ran all the way from Taras in the west made the passage of the river. None now dare to use it save in desperate need, neither elf nor man nor orc, since that road leads to Dungortheb, and the land of dread between the Gorgoroth and the girdle of Melion. And long since has it faded into the wild, or dwindled to a track among weeds and trailing thorns." Then Tuor looked as Voronwë pointed, and far away he caught the glimmer as of open waters under the brief light of dawn. But beyond loomed a darkness, where the great forest of Brethil climbed away southward into a distant highland. Now warily they made their way down the valley side, until at last they came to the ancient road descending from the way-meet on the borders of Brethil, where it crossed the highway from Norgothrond. Then Tuor saw that they were come close to Sirion. The banks of its deep channel fell away in that place, and its waters, choked by a great waste of stones, were spread out into broad shallows, full of the murmur of fretting streams. Then after a little the river gathered together again, and delving a new bed flowed away towards the forest, and far off vanished into a deep mist that his eye could not pierce, for there lay, though he knew it not, the north march of Doriath within the shadow of the girdle of Melion. At once Tuor would hasten to the ford, but Voronwë restrained him, saying, "Over the Brithiach we may not go in open day, nor while any doubt of pursuit remains." "Then shall we sit here and rot?" said Tuor, "for such doubt will remain while the realm of Morgoth endures. Come, under the shadow of the cloak of Ulmo we must go forward." Still Voronwë hesitated, and looked back westward. But the track behind was deserted, and all about was quiet save for the rush of the waters. He looked up, and the sky was grey and empty, for not even a bird was moving. Then suddenly his face brightened with joy, and he cried aloud, "It is well. The Brithiach is guarded still by the enemies of the enemy. The orcs will not follow us here, and under the cloak we may pass now without more doubt." "What new thing have you seen?" said Tuor. "Sure 'tis the sight of mortal men," said Voronwë. "I see the eagles of the Chrysaegrim, and they are coming hither. Watch a while." Then Tuor stood at gaze, and soon high in the air he saw three shapes beating on strong wings down from the distant mountain peaks, now wreathed again in cloud. Slowly they descended in great circles, and then stooped suddenly upon the wayfarers. But before Voronway could call to them, they turned with a wide sweep and rush, and flew northward along the line of the river. "Now let us go," said Voronway. "If there be any orc near by, he will lie cowering nose to ground until the eagles have gone far away." Swiftly down a long slope they hastened, and passed over the Brithiach, walking often dry-foot upon shelves of shingle, or wading in the shoals no more than knee-deep. The water was clear and very cold, and there was ice upon the shallow pools, where the wandering streams had lost their way among the stones. But never, not even in the fell winter of the fall of Nargothrond, could the deadly breath of the north freeze the main flood of Sirion. On the far side of the ford they came to a gully, as it were the bed of an old stream, in which no water now flowed. Yet once, it seemed, a torrent had cloven its deep channel, coming down from the north out of the mountains of Ecoria, and bearing thence all the stones of the Brithiach down into Sirion. "At last, beyond hope, we find it," cried Voronway. "See, here is the mouth of the dry river, and that is the road we must take." Then they passed into the gully, and as it turned north and the slopes of the land went steeply up, so its sides rose upon either hand, and Tuor stumbled in the dim light among the stones with which its rough bed was strewn. "If this is a road," he said, "it is an evil one for the weary." "Yet it is the road to Turgon," said Voronway. "Then the more do I marvel," said Tuor, "that its entrance lies open and unguarded. I had looked to find a great gate and strength of guard." "That you shall yet see," said Voronway. "This is but the approach. A road I named it, yet upon it none have passed for more than 300 years, save messengers few and secret, and all the craft of the Noldor has been expended to conceal it, since the hidden people entered in. Does it lie open? Would you have known it if you had not had one of the hidden kingdoms for a guide? Or would you have guessed it to be but the work of the weathers and the waters of the wilderness? And are there not the eagles, as you have seen? They are the folk of Thorondor, who dwelt once even on Thangorodrim, ere Morgoth grew so mighty, and dwell now in the mountains of Turgon since the fall of Fingolfin. They alone, save the Noldor, know the hidden kingdom, and guard the skies above it. Though as yet no servant of the enemy has dared to fly into the high airs, and they bring much news to the king of all that moves in the lands without. Had we been orcs, doubt not that we should have been seized and cast from a great height upon the pitiless rocks." "I doubt it not," said Tuor, "but it comes into my mind to wonder also whether news will not now come to Turgon of our approach swifter than we, and if that be good or ill, you alone can say." "Neither good nor ill," said Voronway, "for we cannot pass the guard gate unmarked, be we looked for or no, and if we come there, the guards will need no report that we are not orcs. But to pass we shall need a greater plea than that, for you do not guess, Tuor, the peril that we then shall face. Blame me not as one unwarned for what may then betide. May the power of the Lord of Waters be shown indeed, for in that hope alone have I been willing to guide you. And if it fails, then more surely shall we die than by all the perils of wild and winter." But Tuor said, "Forebode no more. Death in the wild is certain, and death at the gate is yet in doubt to me. For all your words, Lead me still on. Many miles they toiled on in the stones of the dry river, until they could go on no further, and the evening brought darkness into the deep cleft. They climbed out then onto the east bank, and they had now come into the tumbled hills that lay at the feet of the mountains, and looking up Tuor saw that they towered up in a fashion other than that of any mountains that he had seen, for their sides were like sheer walls, piled each one above and behind their lower, as were they great towers of many-storied precipices. But the day had waned, and all the lands were grey and misty, and the vale of Sirion was shrouded in shadow. Then Voronway led him to a shallow cave in a hillside that looked out over the lonely slopes of Dimbar, and they crept within, and there they lay hid, and they ate their last crumbs of food, and were cold and weary, but slept not. Thus did Tuor and Voronway come in the dusk of the 18th day of Hisime, the 37th of their journey, to the towers of the Akoriath, and the threshold of Turgon, and by the power of Ulmo escaped both the doom and the malice. When the first glimmer of day filtered grey amid the mists of Dimbar, they crept back into the dry river, and soon after its course turned eastward, winding up to the very walls of the mountains, and straight before them there loomed a great precipice, rising sheer and sudden from a steep slope upon which grew a tangled thicket of thorn trees. Into this thicket the stony channel entered, and there it was still dark as night, and they halted, for the thorns grew far down the sides of the gully, and their lacing branches were a dense roof above it, so low that often Tuor and Voronway must crawl under like beasts stealing back to their lair. But at last, as with great labour, they came to the very foot of the cliff. They found an opening, as it were the mouth of a tunnel worn in the hard rock by waters flowing from the heart of the mountains. They entered, and within there was no light, but Voronway went steadily forward, while Tuor followed with his hand upon his shoulder, bending a little, for the roof was low. Thus for a time they went on blindly, step by step, until presently they felt the ground beneath their feet had become level and free from loose stones. Then they halted and breathed deeply, as they stood listening. The air seemed fresh and wholesome, and they were aware of a great space around and above them, but all was silent, and not even the drip of water could be heard. It seemed to Tuor that Voronway was troubled and in doubt, and he whispered, "Where then is the guarded gate? Or have we indeed now passed it?" "Nay," said Voronway, "yet I wonder, for it is strange that any incomer should creep thus far unchallenged. I fear some stroke in the dark." But their whispers aroused the sleeping echoes, and they were enlarged and multiplied, and ran in the roof and the unseen walls, hissing and murmuring as the sound of many stealthy voices. And even as the echoes died in the stone, Tuor heard out of the heart of the darkness a voice speak in the Elven tongues, first in the high speech of the Noldor, which he knew not, and then in the tongue of Beleriand, though in a manner somewhat strange to his ears, as of a people long sundered from their kin. "Stand," it said. "Stir not, or you will die, be you foes or friends." "We are friends," said Voronway. "Then do as we bid," said the voice. The echo of their voices rolled into silence. Voronway and Tuor stood still, and it seemed to Tuor that many slow minutes passed, and a fear was in his heart such as no other peril of his road had brought. Then there came the beat of feet, growing to a tramping loud as the march of trolls in that hollow place. Suddenly an elven lantern was unhooded, and its bright ray was turned upon Voronway before him, but nothing else could Tuor see save a dazzling star in the darkness, and he knew that while that beam was upon him he could not move, neither to flee nor to run forward. For a moment they were held thus in the eye of the light, and then the voice spoke again, saying, "Show your faces." And Voronway cast back his hood, and his face shone in the ray, hard and clear as if graven in stone, and Tuor marvelled to see its beauty. And he spoke proudly, saying, "Know you not whom you see? I am Voronway, son of Aranwe, of the house of Fingolfin. Or am I forgotten in my own land after a few years? Far beyond thought of Middle-earth I have wandered, yet I remember your voice, Elendil. Then Voronway will remember also the laws of this land," said the voice. "Since by command he went forth, he has the right to return, but not to lead hither any stranger. By that deed his right is void, and he must be led as a prisoner to the king's judgment. As for the stranger, he shall be slain or held captive at the judgment of the guard. Let him hither, that I may judge." Then Voronway led Tuor towards the light, and as they drew near, many Noldor, mail-clad and armed, stepped forward out of the darkness, and surrounded them with drawn swords. And Elendil, captain of the guard, who bore the bright lamp, looked long and closely at them. "This is strange in you, Voronway," he said. "We were long friends. Why then would you set me thus cruelly between the law and my friendship? If you had led hither unbidden one of the other houses of the Noldor, that were enough. But you have brought to knowledge of the way a mortal man, for by his eyes I perceive his kin. Yet free can he never again go. Knowing the secret, and as one of alien kin that has dared to enter, I should slay him, even though he be your friend and dear to you. In the wide lands without Elendil, many strange things may befall one, and tasks unlooked for be laid on one," Voronway answered. "Other shall the wanderer return than as he set forth. What I have done under command greater than the law of the guard. The king alone should judge me, and him that comes with me." Then Tuor spoke, and feared no longer. "I come with Voronway, son of Aranwe, because he was appointed to be my guide by the Lord of Waters. To this end was he delivered from the wrath of the sea and the doom of the Valar. For I bear from Ulmo and Edend to the son of Fingolfin, and to him will I speak it." Thereat Elendil looked in wonder upon Tuor. "Who then are you," he said, "and whence come you?" "I am Tuor, son of Huor, of the house of Hedor, and the kindred of Hurin, and these names, I am told, are not unknown in the hidden kingdom. From Nevrast I have come through many perils to seek it." "From Nevrast," said Elendil. "It is said that none dwell there since our people departed." "It is said truly," answered Tuor. "Empty and cold stand the courts of Vinyamar, yet thence I come. Bring me now to him that built those halls of old. In matters so great judgment is not mine," said Elendil. "Therefore I will lead you to the light, where more may be revealed, and I will deliver you to the warden of the great gate." Then he spoke in command, And Tuor and Voronwe were set between tall guards, 2 before and 3 behind them, and their captain led them from the cavern of the outer guard, and they passed, as it seemed, into a straight passage, and there walked long upon a level floor until a pale light gleamed ahead. Thus they came at length to a wide arch with tall pillars upon either hand, hewn in the rock, and between hung a great portcullis of crossed wooden bars, marvellously carved and studded with nails of iron. Elamachiel touched it, and it rose silently, and they passed through, and Tuor saw that they stood at the end of a ravine, the like of which he had never before beheld or imagined in his thought. Long though he had walked in the wild mountains of the north, for beside the Orfalk Echo Kirith Niniach was but a groove in the rock. Here the hands of the Valar themselves in ancient wars of the world's beginning had wrested the great mountains asunder, and the sides of the rift were sheer as if axe cloven, and they towered up to heights unguessable. There far aloft ran a ribbon of sky, and against its deep blue stood black peaks and jagged pinnacles, remote but hard, cruel as spears. Too high were those mighty walls for the winter sun to overlook, and though it was now full morning, faint stars glimmered above the mountain tops, and down below all was dim but for the pale light of lamps set beside the climbing road. For the floor of the ravine sloped steeply up, eastward, and upon the left hand Tuor saw beside the stream bed a wide way, laid and paved with stone, winding upward till it vanished into shadow. "You have passed the first gate, the gate of the wood," said Elamachiel. "There lies the way. We must hasten." How far that deep road ran Tuor could not guess, and as he stared onward a great weariness came upon him like a cloud. A chill wind hissed over the faces of the stones, and he drew his cloak close about him. "Cold blows the wind from the hidden kingdom," he said. "Yea, indeed," said Voronwe. "To a stranger it might seem that pride has made the servants of Turgon pitiless. Long and hard seem the leagues of the 7 gates to the hungry and wayworn. If Allah were less stern, long ago guile and hatred would have entered and destroyed us. That you know well," said Elamachiel. "But we are not pitiless. Here there is no food, and the stranger may not go back through a gate that he has passed. Endure then a little, and at the 2nd gate you shall be eased." "It is well," said Tuor, and he went forward as he was bidden. After a little he turned, and saw that Elamachiel alone followed with Voronwe. "There is no need more of guards," said Elamachiel, reading his thought. "From the Orfalk there is no escape for elf or man, and no returning." Thus they went on up the steep way, sometimes by long stairs, sometimes by winding slopes, under the daunting shadow of the cliff, until some half league from the wooden gate Tuor saw that the way was barred by a great wall built across the ravine from side to side, with stout towers of stone at either hand. In the wall was a great archway above the road, but it seemed that masons had blocked it with a single mighty stone. As they drew near, its dark and polished face gleamed in the light of a white lamp that hung above the midst of the arch. "Here stands the 2nd gate, the gate of stone," said Elamachiel, and going up to it he thrust lightly upon it. It turned upon an unseen pivot until its edge was towards them, and the way was open upon either side, and they passed through into a court where stood many armed guards clad in grey. No word was spoken, but Elamachiel led his charges to a chamber beneath the northern tower, and there food and wine was brought to them, and they were permitted to rest a while. Scant may the fare seem said Alamakil to Tuor. But if your claim be proved, hereafter it shall richly be amended. It is enough, said Tuor, faint with a heart that needed better healing. And indeed such refreshment did he find in the drink and food of the Noldor that soon he was eager to go on. After a little space they came to a wall yet higher and stronger than before, and in it was set the third gate, the gate of bronze, a great twofold door hung with shields and plates of bronze, wherein were wrought many figures and strange signs. Upon the wall above its lintel were 3 square towers, roofed and clad with copper, that by some device of smithcraft were ever bright and gleamed as fire in the rays of the red lamps ranged like torches along the wall. Again silently they passed the gate, and saw in the court beyond a yet greater company of guards in mail that glowed like dull fire, and the blades of their axes were red. Of the kindred of the Sindar of Nevrast, for the most part, were those that held this gate. Now they came to the most toilsome road, for in the midst of the Orfolk the slope was at the steepest, and as they climbed, Tuor saw the mightiest of the walls looming dark above him. Thus at last they drew near to the 4th gate, the gate of writhen iron. High and black was the wall, and lit with no lamps. 4 towers of iron stood upon it, and between the 2 inner towers was set an image of a great eagle wrought in iron, even the likeness of King Thorondor himself, as he would alight upon a mountain from the high airs. But as Tuor stood before the gate, it seemed to his wonder that he was looking through boughs and stems of imperishable trees into a pale glade of the moon. For the light came through the traceries of the gate, which were wrought and hammered into the shapes of trees with writhing roots and woven branches laden with leaves and flowers. And as he passed through, he saw how this could be, for the wall was of great thickness, and there was not 1 grille, but 3 in line, so set that to one who approached in the middle of the way each formed part of the device, but the light beyond was the light of day. For they had climbed now to a great height above the lowlands where they began, and beyond the iron gate the road ran almost level. Moreover, they had passed the crown and heart of the Akoriath, and the mountain towers now fell swiftly down towards the inner hills, and the ravine opened wider, and its sides became less sheer. Its long shoulders were mantled with white snow, and the light of the sky, snow mirrored, came white as moonlight through a glimmering mist that filled the air. Now they passed through the lines of the iron guards that stood behind the gate, black with their mantles, and their mail, and long shields, and their faces were masked with visors bearing each an eagle's beak. Then Elamakil went before them, and they followed him into the pale light, and Tuor saw beside the way a sward of grass, where like stars bloomed the white flowers of Uilos, the evermine that knows no season and withers not. And thus in wonder and lightning of heart he was brought to the gate of silver. The wall of the 5th gate was built of white marble, and was low and broad, and its parapet was a trellis of silver between 5 great globes of marble, and there stood many archers robed in white. The gate was in shape as 3 parts of a circle, and wrought of silver and pearl of Nevrast in likeness of the moon. But above the gate, upon the midmost globe, stood an image of the white tree Telperion, wrought of silver and malachite, with flowers made of great pearls of Valar. And beyond the gate, in a wide court paved with marble, green and white, stood archers in silver mail and white crested helms, 100 upon either hand. Then Elamarkiel led Tuor and Voronwe through their silent ranks, and they entered upon a long white road that ran straight towards the sixth gate. And as they went, the grass sward became wider, and among the white stars of Oilos there opened many small flowers like eyes of gold. So they came to the Golden Gate, the last of the ancient gates of Turgon that were wrought before the Nearnaiath. And it was much like the Gate of Silver, save that the walls was built of yellow marble, and the globes and parapet were of red gold, and there were 6 globes, and in the midst upon a golden pyramid was set an image of laurelin, the tree of the sun, with flowers wrought of topaz, and long clusters upon chains of gold. And the gate itself was adorned with discs of gold, many rayed in likeness of the sun, set amid devices of garnet, and topaz, and yellow diamonds. In the court beyond were arrayed 300 archers with long bows, and their mail was gilded, and tall golden plumes rose from their helmets, and their great round shields were red as flame. Now sunlight fell upon the further road, for the walls of the hills were low on either side, and green, but for the snows upon their tops, and Elamarkiel hastened forward, for the way was short to the 7th gate, the gate of steel that Meiglin wrought after the return from the Nearnaiath, across the wide entrance to the Orfolk Echo. No wall stood there, but on either hand were 2 round towers of great height, many windowed, tapering in 7 stories to a turret of bright steel, and between the towers there stood a mighty fence of steel that rusted not, but glittered cold and white. 7 great pillars of steel there were, tall with the height and girth of strong young trees, but ending in a bitter spike that rose to the sharpness of a needle. And between the pillars were 7 cross bars of steel, and in each space 7 times 7 rods of steel upright, with heads like the broad blades of spears. But in the centre, above the midmost pillar, and the greatest, was raised a mighty image of the king helm of Turgon, the crown of the hidden kingdom, set about with diamonds. No gate or door could Tuor see in this mighty hedge of steel, but as he drew near, through the spaces between its bars there came, as it seemed to him, a dazzling light, and he shaded his eyes and stood still in dread and wonder. But Elamarkiel went forward, and no gate opened to his touch, but he struck upon a bar, and the fence rang like a harp of many strings, giving forth clear notes and harmony that ran from tower to tower. Straightway there issued riders from the towers, but before those of the north tower came one upon a white horse, and he dismounted and strode towards them. And high and noble as was Elamarkiel, greater and more lordly was Ecthelion, lord of the fountains, at that time warden of the great gate. All in silver was he clad, and upon his shining helm there was set a spike of steel pointed with a diamond, and as his esquire took his shield it shimmered as if it were bedewed with drops of rain, that were indeed 1,000 studs of crystal. Elamarkiel saluted him and said, "Here have I brought Voronwe Aranwion, returning from Bala, and here is the stranger that he has led hither, who demands to see the king." Then Ecthelion turned to Tuor, but he drew his cloak about him and stood silent, facing him. And it seemed to Voronwe that a mist mantled Tuor, and his stature was increased, so that the peak of his high hood overtopped the helm of the elf lord, as it were the crest of a grey sea wave riding to the land. But Ecthelion bent his bright glance upon Tuor, and after a silence he spoke gravely, saying, "You have come to the last gate. Know then that no stranger who passes it shall ever go out again, save by the door of death. Speak not ill boding. If the messenger of the Lord of Waters go by that door, then all those who dwell here will follow him. Lord of the fountains, hinder not the messenger of the Lord of Waters. Then Voronwe and all those who stood near looked again in wonder at Tuor, marvelling at his words and voice. And to Voronwe it seemed as if he heard a great voice, but as of one who called from afar off. But to Tuor it seemed that he listened to himself speaking, as if another spoke with his mouth. For a while Ecthelion stood silent, looking at Tuor, and slowly awe filled his face, as if in the grey shadow of Tuor's cloak he saw visions from far away. Then he bowed, and went to the fence and laid hands upon it, and gates opened inward on either side of the pillar of the crown. Then Tuor passed through, and coming to a high sward that looked out over the valley beyond, he beheld a vision of Gondolin amid the white snow. And so entranced was he that for long he could look at nothing else, for he saw before him at last the vision of his desire out of dreams of longing. Thus he stood and spoke no word. Silent upon either hand stood a host of the army of Gondolin. All of the 7 kinds of the 7 gates were there represented, but their captains and chieftains were upon horses, white and grey. Then, even as they gazed on Tuor in wonder, his cloak fell down, and he stood there before them in the mighty livery of Nevrast. And many were there who had seen Turgon himself set these things upon the wall behind the high seat of Vinyamar. Then Ecthelion said at last, "Now no further proof is needed, and even the name he claims as son of Hua matters less than his clear truth, that he comes from Ulmo himself."